Hey guys, tonight we wander softly into the warm, bustling heart of early colonial American kitchens, a place where the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, fresh herbs, and hearty stews simmering gently in heavy pots. You trudge past rough-hewn tables dusted with flour and catch the soft clink of ironware, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, and the occasional murmur of conversation woven through the crackle of the fire. It's cozy, familiar, yet utterly foreign all at once. You probably won't survive a week here, not without some serious thick-soled boots and a tolerance for slightly questionable meat cuts. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. There's something nice about knowing we're easing into history together, wherever you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step inside this kitchen with a sense of curiosity tinged with respect. The early settlers arrived with little more than hope, determination, and whatever they could carry. These kitchens, often modest by today's standards, were the backbone of survival and community. The hearth was the heart, always glowing, always busy. A massive iron pot hung over the fire, slowly bubbling with what might be a stew of salted pork, dried peas, and whatever root vegetables had survived the winter. The air is thick with wood smoke and the faint aroma of dried herbs tucked away in bundles from the summer harvest. Historians still argue whether the early colonial kitchens were more utilitarian or if settlers brought over a longing for the comforts of old-world cooking, but it's clear these spaces were a delicate dance between necessity and tradition. Your eyes wander to a rough table laden with homemade pottery, jugs filled with sour cider, a bowl of hardtack biscuits, and a wooden mortar and pestle with crushed spices waiting to flavor the next meal. The kitchen's stone floor is cool beneath your feet, contrasting the warmth rising from the hearth. You hear the soft scrape of a wooden spoon against a pot and the occasional creak of floorboards as someone moves purposefully but quietly. It's a place of routine, of early mornings and late evenings, where every sound and smell has its place and purpose. While the main ingredients were often straightforward, corn, beans, salted meats, there's a quirky little fact you might enjoy. Some settlers experimented with what we might now call early fusion cuisine, blending European recipes with native ingredients like squash and wild herbs. Picture a stew simmering with venison, seasoned with sassafras leaves and thickened with cornmeal, something both foreign and familiar on the colonial palate. The fire is low but steady, crackling softly as you imagine the hands that have tended it for hours, coaxing flavor and warmth from humble ingredients. There's a comforting rhythm to it all, a gentle assurance that no matter the hardships outside, here was a place of nurture and gathering. The smells and sounds are your companions as you lean in closer, feeling the history in the worn wooden beams overhead and the faint scent of smoke lingering in the heavy air. You might imagine the stories shared over steaming bowls, the quiet moments of reflection and the cheerful laughter mingling with the crackling fire. Remember, as we settle in, that these kitchens were as much about community as sustenance, places where flavors and traditions mixed slowly, much like the simmering stews. And speaking of slow, historians still debate how much of the native culinary knowledge was embraced versus overlooked, a gentle reminder that this story is as rich and layered as the meals they crafted. So, breathe in the warm, smoky air, listen to the soft murmurs, and let yourself drift into the everyday flavors of these early colonial kitchens, where survival met subtle delight in every bite. You step further into the colonial kitchen, where the influence of indigenous ingredients quietly yet profoundly shapes the flavors that fill the air. Imagine baskets brimming with wild berries, squash, and corn, foods native to this land that settlers quickly learned to appreciate, if sometimes grudgingly. The mingling of European traditions and native crops created an evolving culinary landscape, a dance between old and new, wild and cultivated. The squash on the table is vibrant orange, nestled beside a heap of dried beans and a small pile of ground cornmeal, each a staple borrowed from indigenous neighbors. You can almost hear the rustle of maize stalks in the summer breeze and smell the earthiness of freshly dug tubers. The indigenous peoples have been cultivating these crops for centuries, understanding their seasons and flavors with a patient wisdom that many settlers lacked at first. A mainstream fact you might find soothing: maize, or corn, became the foundational grain for many colonial diets, not just as a substitute but as a beloved food. It was toasted, ground into meal for porridge, or mixed into breads and cakes. But here's a quirky tidbit: some settlers even tried grinding up wild tobacco leaves to mix with cornmeal, hoping for an extra kick in their food, though historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just the work of a few experimental gourmands. You watch a woman carefully preparing a thick batter for Jonna cakes, stirring the coarse cornmeal with water and a pinch of salt. The recipe might seem plain now, but back then, it was a simple comfort food, quick to make and satisfying on a chilly morning. The texture is rustic and uneven, a far cry from your modern, fluffy pancakes, but with a hearty charm all its own. Around you, dried herbs hang from the rafters: mint, sage, and wild thyme, collected from nearby forests. Indigenous knowledge about medicinal and edible plants was slowly seeping into colonial cooking, a subtle nod to centuries of native expertise. Settlers might have balked at some of the unfamiliar flavors, but over time, ingredients like sassafras and sumac found their way into soups and stews, adding layers of complexity and aroma. It's easy to forget how much trial and error went into these early culinary experiments. Historians still debate whether settlers intentionally sought native ingredients out of necessity or curiosity, or if they stumbled upon them reluctantly, guided by indigenous friends and neighbors. Either way, the result was a cuisine in flux, blending the practical with the new, the familiar with the strange. Imagine, then, a quiet evening meal, a bowl of thick corn porridge, flavored with a touch of maple syrup, another gift from native trees, and a side of roasted venison. The flavors are earthy and grounding, a culinary embrace of the land itself. You might catch the soft crackle of the hearth fire as the meal stews gently, filling the room with comforting warmth. And as you breathe in these mingled scents, you might smile at the thought that, despite the hardships, these kitchens were places of gentle innovation. People found ways to survive and thrive, incorporating the wisdom of the land with the comforts of home. It's a reminder that even the most ordinary meals can hold stories worth savoring. So, as you imagine the mingling of indigenous and colonial flavors, let the gentle hum of history soothe you, carrying you deeper into the slow, simmering rhythms of early American kitchens. As you settle deeper into the warmth of the colonial kitchen, your senses begin to savor the slow, deliberate art of food preservation, a crucial skill when modern refrigeration is just a distant dream. Imagine a world where every meal depends on yesterday's careful work, where smoke, salt, and cool cellars hold the promise of tomorrow's sustenance. The smell of curing meats hangs faintly in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of pickled vegetables patiently steeping in wooden barrels. Preservation techniques were the lifeblood of survival here. Settlers salted pork and beef with a practiced hand, rubbing grains into every crevice before hanging the meat to dry in smokehouses. You can almost hear the soft crackle of smoldering hickory, the slow dance of smoke weaving through cured strips of bacon and slabs of ham. This was no rushed business. Curing was an exercise in patience, a culinary meditation that could stretch on for weeks or months. Here's a mainstream fact to help you picture this. Salt was not just a seasoning but a powerful preservative that allowed colonists to store meat safely through harsh winters. And then there were the root cellars, cool, dark underground rooms where turnips, carrots, and potatoes rested snugly, wrapped in straw to keep their crispness. The kitchen's stone floor beneath you might have been cool and damp, a perfect environment for these earthy treasures. But here's a quirky little nugget. Some colonists preserved fruits by packing them in honey or maple syrup, a sweet alternative to drying or fermenting. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or reserved for special occasions, but it certainly adds a comforting sweetness to the otherwise utilitarian preservation methods. You watch as a settler carefully stirs a vat of sauerkraut, the cabbage fermenting slowly, bubbles rising as the flavors deepen. Fermentation was a quiet ally against scurvy and winter hunger, a gentle reminder that time and patience could transform simple ingredients into rich, tangy delicacies. The kitchen is a hum of soft sounds, the clink of wooden barrels, the scrape of a knife cutting through cured meats, the whispered hiss of steam rising from a pot of boiling water. These preservation rituals were not just chores but soothing routines, anchoring the day's work and offering the promise of meals yet to come. Imagine the relief of opening a barrel of salted pork after weeks of cold storage or biting into a crisp, fermented pickle during the bleak midwinter. These preserved foods, while humble, carry the deep sense of comfort and security. As you imagine the subtle complexity of these preservation methods, remember the delicate balance they struck between necessity and care. Every slice of salted meat and jar of pickled vegetables tells a story of resilience and quiet ingenuity. So breathe in the smoky, earthy scents, let the slow rhythms of curing and fermenting soothe your mind, and drift further into the cozy world of early colonial kitchens, where the future was preserved one meal at a time. You find yourself drawn to the quiet ritual of colonial breakfasts, a gentle pause before the day's bustle. Imagine waking to the soft crackle of embers in the hearth, the dim morning light filtering through wooden shutters, and the comforting scent of porridge simmering slowly over the fire. Breakfast in these early kitchens wasn't about elaborate feasts, it was a humble yet soothing start, often the only meal prepared fresh each day. Settlers typically gathered around a roughly hewn table, passing bowls filled with cornmeal mush or oats boiled into a thick gruel. The texture might be unfamiliar, grainy and substantial rather than fluffy, but it was a warm, filling way to greet the day. Sometimes a dollop of fresh cream or a drizzle of maple syrup, if they were lucky, lent a whisper of sweetness. You might imagine the soft murmur of conversation mixed with the clinking of wooden spoons, a comforting soundtrack to the morning's calm. A mainstream fact to keep in mind: coffee was a rare luxury for most colonists during breakfast, with small cups often reserved for the wealthiest households or special occasions. Instead, you'd find more common drinks like warm water infused with herbs, or weak ale meant to stave off hunger until the midday meal. Here's a quirky historical tidbit: some colonial households would sprinkle powdered sassafras leaves into their morning porridges, believing it brought health benefits and a touch of flavor, an early form of what you might now call superfood. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, but it adds a curious layer to the morning ritual. The kitchen smells like with smoke and a faint earthiness from the grains. You might hear the soft scrape of a knife peeling a newly harvested apple or the rustle of dried herbs hung nearby. These mornings were slow, deliberate moments before the sun climbed higher, when families prepared themselves quietly for the work ahead. Remember the importance of routine in these households. Breakfast was as much about gathering strength as it was about connection. It was a shared pause, a soft beginning to a day filled with toil but also small joys, like a warm meal and the gentle company of loved ones. Imagine the comfort of those first bites and sips, grounding settlers in a world that could otherwise feel wild and unpredictable. These breakfasts, simple and repetitive, offered a steady rhythm to life's uncertainties. So, as you imagine the soft light, the gentle murmurs, and the taste of coarse grains sweetened just enough, let yourself settle into the peaceful cadence of colonial mornings. Let this quiet start lull your mind deeper into the history simmering softly in these early American kitchens. You step outside the kitchen now, toward the small but vital gardens that nestled close to the homestead, a place where settlers grew and gathered fresh produce that brought color and life to their meals. Imagine dew-kissed leaves sparkling in the early morning sun and the earthy aroma of damp soil mingling with the scent of herbs freshly plucked from neat rows. These gardens were more than just a source of food, they were a quiet refuge, a connection to the land, and a steady promise of sustenance. Garden to table wasn't a trendy phrase then, it was the everyday rhythm of survival and flavor. Tomatoes, beans, squash, and onions grew side by side, their tender shoots slowly reaching upward, cared for with patient hands. You might imagine a child bending down carefully to harvest a ripe pumpkin or an adult gently pulling fresh carrots from the earth, dirt still clinging to their roots. A mainstream fact to keep in mind, many colonial gardens followed the indigenous Three Sisters planting method: corn, beans, and squash grown together, a practice both practical and poetic, as the plants supported and nourished one another. This cooperation of nature and nurture speaks volumes about how settlers adapted to their new environment. Here's a quirky detail. Some settlers believed talking to their plants encouraged growth, whispering kind words or even humming tunes as they tended rows of herbs and vegetables. Historians still argue whether this was a common superstition or the charming habit of a few hopeful gardeners, but it certainly adds a gentle layer to the daily toil. The garden's quiet buzz is a soft chorus, the hum of bees flitting from flower to flower, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the occasional chirp of a robin darting through branches. These sounds mingle with the faint aroma of rosemary and thyme, herbs that would later flavor the stews and breads inside the kitchen. You watch as fresh-picked kale leaves are gathered into bundles, destined to simmer slowly with salted pork or be added to a hearty pottage. The act of harvesting itself feels meditative, a slow, tactile connection to the land that sustained the settlers. These gardens were often humble and small but endlessly important, a daily act of hope and care. Settlers who once longed for familiar foods from home found new flavors here, learning which native plants could thrive and which needed coaxing. Remember that these gardens weren't just about food, they were also a source of medicinal herbs, lavender for calming, mint for digestion, and chamomile for gentle sleep. Each plant carried stories of health and comfort passed down through generations. So, as you imagine the soft light filtering through leaves, the scent of fresh earth, and the tender care given to each plant, let this slow, soothing rhythm of garden-to-table life ease your mind. Let the quiet magic of these early American gardens carry you deeper into the gentle story of colonial kitchens. You return to the kitchen, where the aroma of roasted meats and fresh-caught fish fills the air, the quiet backbone of colonial sustenance. Imagine the crackling fire under a heavy iron skillet, the soft hiss of fat as it melts away, and the gentle browning of venison or freshly caught bass. These staples weren't just meals, they were the result of patience, skill, and the quiet rhythm of hunting and fishing that connected settlers to the wilderness around them. Meat and fish were treasures here, especially in lean winter months when gardens lay dormant and fresh produce was scarce. You might picture a settler carefully cleaning a freshly caught trout by a bubbling stream or patiently waiting for game to appear in the early morning mist. It was a slow, respectful dance with nature, one that required knowing when to act and when to wait. Here's a mainstream fact: hunting was often communal, with neighbors sharing the spoils and trading cuts of meat to ensure no one went hungry. The kitchen's stone table might be strewn with salted pork sides drying, fish hanging from hooks near the fire to cure gently in the smoke. A quirky detail: some settlers favored cooking fish wrapped in leaves from local trees, believing it enhanced flavor and kept the meat moist. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, but it hints at a fascinating fusion of European and native culinary techniques. The sounds in this part of the kitchen are subdued but alive: the soft scraping of knives preparing meat, the occasional pop of fat hitting hot coals, and the rhythmic tap of a wooden spoon stirring a rich fish stew. These sounds blend into a comforting lullaby of domestic life. Picture a slow meal, thick slices of salted pork, a bowl of pottage with bits of dried fish, and a side of root vegetables roasted over coals. The flavors are earthy and filling, each bite a quiet celebration of survival and skill. Remember, these kitchens were spaces of patience, where the slow cooking of meats reflected the slow passage of seasons and the settlers' quiet respect for the land's gifts. Each meal was a small victory in the ongoing challenge of colonial life. So breathe in the smoky, savory aromas, listen to the gentle kitchen symphony, and let the steady rhythm of meat and fish preparation lull you deeper into the soothing history simmering softly in these early American kitchens. You linger now near the humble jars and baskets that hold the secret warmth of spices and seasonings, small treasures that brought bursts of flavor and comfort to colonial dishes. Imagine the faint scent of cinnamon mingling with the sharpness of dried rosemary and the earthy depth of crushed peppercorns. These flavors were often rare and precious, carried over long distances on winding trade routes, their worth almost as much as gold. Colonial kitchens were modest, but a little spice could transform a simple stew into a feast of sensation. Settlers eagerly awaited shipments of nutmeg, cloves, and allspice, their senses tingling at the first crack of a fragrant pod. Even local herbs like sage and thyme were treasured for their ability to lift the flavors of salted meats and hearty vegetables. Here's a mainstream fact to savor: the spice trade was a driving force behind exploration and colonization, with settlers often relying on these aromatic imports to remind them of distant homelands and add variety to their meals. A pinch of cinnamon in a cornmeal pudding or a dash of pepper in a meat stew could elevate the ordinary into the extraordinary. A quirky tidbit: some settlers believed that certain spices, like nutmeg, had mild medicinal properties, calming digestion or warding off illness. Historians still debate how much of this was grounded in actual health benefits versus hopeful tradition, but it certainly added a layer of ritual to seasoning food. The kitchen air hums softly with the rustle of dried herbs being crushed, the gentle clink of small glass jars on wooden shelves, and the whispered promise of flavors to come. You might imagine a woman carefully grinding cinnamon sticks with a mortar and pestle, releasing clouds of fragrant dust that settle warmly on her skin. Spices weren't just about flavor, they were about connection and comfort, threads linking the settlers present to memories of faraway lands and the hope of warmth on cold, dark nights. The slow, deliberate use of these precious seasonings reflects the settlers' desire to create not just food, but home. Picture a simple broth, enriched with a handful of savory herbs, or a baked pudding perfumed with cloves, the aroma drifting gently through the wooden beams. These subtle touches transform the mundane into moments of calm delight. So as you inhale the mingled scents of herbs and spices, let the soft hum of seasoning and stirring soothe your mind. Let the gentle rhythm of flavor weaving through colonial kitchens carry you further into the comforting depths of history's slow simmer. You find yourself drawn to the quiet, steady craft of baking, where the air fills with the warm, comforting scent of bread rising gently in the oven. Imagine a rustic wooden table dusted with flour, a lump of dough resting beneath a cloth, and the rhythmic meeting of hands working patiently to coax life into simple ingredients. Baking was both an art and a necessity in colonial kitchens, the cornerstone of many meals and a source of daily comfort. Bread was more than food, it was a symbol of sustenance and hospitality, often baked in brick ovens or iron skillets, and shared among family and neighbors. Cornbread and rye loaves were common staples, their textures hearty and their flavors earthy. The slow fermentation of dough and the cautious timing of oven fires demanded patience and skill, making bread making a meditative task as much as a practical one. A mainstream fact to savor here: many colonial families relied on sourdough starters, cultures of wild yeast passed down through generations, which gave their bread a distinctive tang and resilience. These starters were carefully nurtured, a living heirloom in the kitchen. Here's a quirky tidbit: some settlers believed that baking bread on certain days, like Sundays, brought good luck and better rises, blending superstition with the slow science of fermentation. Historians still debate how widely these beliefs influence baking schedules, but they add a charming layer of ritual to the process. The kitchen hums with the gentle sound of flour sifted through hands, the soft slap of dough folded and turned, and the faint crackle of a fire readying the oven. You might imagine the oven door creaking open, releasing a cloud of warm, yeasty air that fills the room with promise. Freshly baked bread was often accompanied by simple spreads, honey, butter, or homemade preserves, each bite a humble pleasure in a challenging world. The slow cooling of loaves on wooden racks, the soft tearing of crusts, and the warm, doughy crumb inside were moments of quiet joy. Remember, baking was a communal affair too. Neighbors shared oven space and recipes, strengthening bonds as much as bellies. The kitchen's warmth was a gathering place where stories and dough rose together. So, as you breathe in the rich aroma of baking bread and imagine the patient hands shaping dough, let the slow, rhythmic craft of colonial baking soothe you. Let this gentle tradition carry you deeper into the comforting embrace of early American kitchens. You shift your attention to the assortment of cooking tools and utensils that form the silent backbone of the colonial kitchen. A collection of well-worn implements, each with its own story and quiet purpose. Picture heavy iron pots blackened by fire, wooden spoons smooth from years of stirring, and sturdy knives sharpened patiently to slice through roots and meats alike. These were the everyday companions of settlers, tools that shaped their food and their lives with steady reliability. The hearth dominated the kitchen, and hanging above it were cranes and hooks to suspend pots at just the right height over the fire. Cast iron cookware, imported or homemade, was prized for its durability, able to withstand hours of slow cooking. Nearby, mortar and pestle sets waited to grind herbs and spices, releasing delicate aromas into the air. A mainstream fact to ground you: most kitchens lacked many utensils we take for granted today, so settlers had to be resourceful, sometimes using sharpened sticks or even seashells in food preparation. These tools were multi-purpose and cherished for their practicality. Here's a quirky detail to ease your mind. Some colonists fashioned cooking implements from bones or antlers, turning nature's leftovers into functional objects. Historians still debate how common this was, but it certainly adds a layer of rustic charm to the kitchen's atmosphere. You might hear the soft scrape of a knife sharpening on a whetstone, the gentle clatter of wooden spoons in a ceramic bowl, or the occasional creak of an iron pot settling into the fire's embrace. The tactile sensation of gripping these tools, the cool metal, the smooth wood, ties you directly to the hands that wielded them centuries ago. Imagine the slow choreography as a cook lifts a pot from the fire, stirs a bubbling stew, and gently scoops it into a wooden bowl. The kitchen hums quietly, a place of patient labor and quiet satisfaction. Remember, these tools were more than mere utensils. They were extensions of the settler's resilience and adaptability. Each item, simple yet indispensable, carried the marks of use and care, telling stories without words. So, as you imagine the weight and texture of these cooking implements, let the soft sounds and tactile memories soothe you. Let the steady rhythm of clinking pots and stirring spoons carry you deeper into the warm embrace of early colonial kitchens. You find yourself enveloped by the warm, inviting atmosphere of communal meals, where food becomes more than sustenance. It is the thread weaving families and neighbors into a comforting tapestry of connection. Imagine a long, sturdy table surrounded by worn wooden chairs, each occupied by quiet faces illuminated by the flickering glow of candlelight and hearth fire. The air hums softly with the gentle murmur of voices, the scrape of utensils, and the shared contentment of breaking bread together. Meals were often deliberate, unhurried affairs. The pace was slow, giving space for stories to unfold and for the simple pleasure of companionship to be savored. Colonists understood that nourishing the body was inseparable from nurturing community. Plates were passed carefully, dishes shared generously, a taste of hearty stew here, a slice of freshly baked bread there. The kitchen's bounty transformed into moments of calm and belonging. A mainstream fact to settle into: communal eating helped distribute scarce resources fairly, ensuring everyone from the youngest child to the eldest elder had their share. The practice reinforced bonds and offered a reassuring routine amidst the unpredictable hardships of colonial life. Here's a quirky tidbit: some settlers had the custom of saving the first bite, or a piece of bread, for absent family members or even animals, a small ritual of remembrance and care. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, but it beautifully highlights the tenderness wrapped up in these meals. The room is alive with the subtle sounds of cutlery gently tapping bowls, soft laughter, and the quiet settling of wooden chairs. You might imagine the smell of spiced cider mingling with the warmth of roasting meats and the faint fragrance of fresh herbs from the garden. Imagine a simple supper: a thick vegetable stew, slices of cornbread, and stewed apples for dessert. The slow passing of plates allows you to savor the textures and flavors, each bite a quiet celebration of life's modest comforts. Remember that these shared meals were an anchor, providing a rhythm of togetherness in a world that could often feel uncertain. The kitchen's hum was a lullaby of human connection, a soft blanket of security. So, as you envision the gentle clatter, the soft voices, and the shared warmth, let the peaceful ritual of communal meals soothe you. Let this slow, steady heartbeat of early colonial kitchens carry you further into a comforting history that feeds both body and soul. You turn now to the humble but hearty drinks that flowed gently through early colonial kitchens, the warm brews and ciders that accompanied meals and soothed tired bodies after long days. Imagine earthenware mugs cradled in weathered hands, releasing tendrils of steam fragrant with herbs and spices. These drinks weren't about fancy cocktails but simple, comforting sips that warmed both spirit and flesh. Homemade cider was a staple, pressed from apples grown in orchard groves, its sweetness mellowed by time. The faint fizz of fermentation promised a light buzz, a gentle reprieve from hard labor. Meanwhile, herbal teas, brewed from local plants like chamomile, mint, and wintergreen, offered calming relief at day's end, their subtle flavors mingling softly with the smoke and wood aromas filling the kitchen. A mainstream fact: beer and ale were common in colonial diets, not just for pleasure but also for safety, since the brewing process killed many waterborne pathogens. These mild brews were low in alcohol and consumed throughout the day by settlers of all ages. Here's a quirky detail: some colonists believed that sipping warm sassafras tea helped cure everything from headaches to homesickness, a kind of liquid comfort. Historians still debate how much these remedies truly helped versus their role in soothing spirits through ritual and routine. The gentle clink of mugs being passed, the soft bubbling of boiling water, and the muted tapping of wooden spoons stirring sweetened brews form a quiet kitchen symphony. You might picture the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off steaming cups, the warmth seeping through cracked hands chilled by morning frost. Imagine a moment where a mother hands a small cup of mild cider to her child, a gesture of comfort and shared calm. Or an elder quietly sipping an herbal infusion by the fire, eyes closed in contentment. These drinks were as much about connection and care as they were about quenching thirst. Remember, these simple beverages helped define the slow rhythms of colonial life, marking times of rest and gathering. The act of brewing and sharing was itself a soothing ritual, binding families and communities in quiet warmth. So, as you breathe in the subtle scents of apples and herbs, feel the gentle warmth of a mug cradled between your hands. Let the soft, steady pace of colonial drinks carry you deeper into the comforting history simmering softly in these early American kitchens. You feel the gentle ebb and flow of fasting and feasting weaving through colonial life like a soft, unspoken rhythm, a balance between restraint and celebration that shaped not only the food but the spirit of the settlers. Imagine a quiet morning where the kitchen is unusually bare, the hearth's fire low, and the meal modest, reflecting days of fasting for religious observance or simply practical necessity. Then picture the warmth and bustle returning with a feast, tables laden with the best of the season's harvest and well-preserved meats, the air alive with laughter and gratitude. Fasting was often tied to the liturgical calendar, with days of abstinence observed quietly and respectfully. On these days, settlers might eat simple porridge, skip meat, or rely on preserved fruits and vegetables, turning the act of restraint into a mindful pause. Feasts, by contrast, were communal highlights, occasions for storytelling, singing, and sharing the kitchen's best bounty. A mainstream fact, feast days like Thanksgiving grew out of this tradition of marking seasons and blessings, blending indigenous harvest celebrations with European customs. These gatherings brought a sense of relief and renewal, a pause from the hardships of daily survival. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some colonists believed that eating certain, lucky, foods during feasts, like pumpkin or wild rice, would ensure good fortune for the coming year. Historians still argue whether these beliefs influenced menu choices or were charming add-ons to already special meals. The kitchen buzzes softly with preparation, the chopping of vegetables, the stirring of thick stews, the careful laying out of simple yet festive dishes. You might imagine the scent of cinnamon and cloves mingling with roasted meats and fresh bread, the air thick with anticipation. Feasting was not only about the food but also about connection and celebration, reinforcing bonds and giving thanks. Fasting, meanwhile, taught patience and reflection, both deeply spiritual and practical in a world where resources were limited. So, as you imagine the quiet days of fasting and the joyful feasts that followed, let the gentle rhythm of balance in early colonial kitchens soothe your mind. Let this soft cadence carry you deeper into the comforting history simmering in the heart's warm glow. You now lean into the curious, sometimes whimsical world of culinary superstitions that quietly flavored early colonial kitchens, little beliefs and rituals that gave settlers a sense of control and comfort amid uncertainty. Imagine a kitchen bathed in soft candlelight, where the clatter of pots mingles with whispered hopes and the gentle thud of a rabbit's foot hanging by the door. These superstitions weren't about fear but a subtle thread of magic woven into daily life, a way to invite good fortune into the simple act of preparing food. One common belief held that spilling salt was unlucky, so much so that quick reflexes were required to toss a pinch over the left shoulder to ward off bad luck. You might picture a cook pausing mid-stir to perform this small ritual, fingers flicking grains skyward with a quiet smile. Herbs like rosemary and sage were thought to protect not just from illness but also from evil spirits, their scent filling the kitchen with more than just flavor. Here's a mainstream fact to settle into. Many of these beliefs have roots in European folk traditions brought across the Atlantic, mingling with Native American practices and evolving in the crucible of colonial life. They reveal a blending of cultures and a shared human desire to find comfort in routine. A quirky tidbit: some settlers believed that hanging garlic in the kitchen would keep away not only vampires but also illness, a charming image, especially since historians still debate whether these superstitions were widely held or mostly anecdotal. The kitchen sounds soften as you imagine a family gathered for a meal, pausing briefly to observe their little rituals, a knock on wood before slicing bread, a whispered thanks for the harvest, a smile exchanged over a spilled pinch of salt. You can almost feel the calm these acts brought, a gentle rhythm that grounded the settlers as much as the steady crackle of the hearth. These superstitions added texture to everyday life, reminding them that food was not just nourishment but a sacred link to tradition and hope. So as you breathe in a mingled sense of herbs and wood smoke, let the soft charm of these kitchen rituals soothe you. Let the slow, ritualistic pace carry you deeper into the comforting history simmering in the heart of early American kitchens. You now find yourself tracing the quiet footsteps of the women who held these kitchens together, their steady hands and patient minds the true heartbeat of early colonial life. Imagine a warm kitchen filled with soft light, where women move with practiced grace, tending fires, kneading dough, and teaching children the gentle art of cooking passed down through generations. Their work was unseen by many, yet essential, a tapestry of care and tradition woven into every meal. Women in these households were not just cooks but keepers of knowledge. They balanced the demands of harvesting, preserving, and preparing food with the nurturing of family and community. Their kitchens were classrooms where recipes were whispered and secrets shared, where the rhythm of daily tasks grounded families in continuity. A mainstream fact to settle with comfort: colonial women often rose before dawn to stoke fires and prepare breakfasts, their days structured around the flow of food and family. These routines, while demanding, offered moments of quiet reflection and mastery. Here's a tender detail: some women maintained herb diaries, simple journals recording the uses of plants, both culinary and medicinal, an early form of family health care. Historians still argue how common these were, but they speak to the resourcefulness and wisdom quietly cultivated in these spaces. You might hear the soft pat of dough being shaped, the gentle clinking of ceramic bowls, and the low murmur of stories shared across a wooden table. The kitchen feels alive with warmth and patience, a sanctuary of care amidst the challenges of colonial life. Picture a mother teaching her daughter how to prepare a simple stew, the lessons more about patience and love than mere cooking. These kitchens were centers of education, connection, and resilience, where food was a language of comfort. Remember, the work of these women, often overlooked, formed the foundation of colonial survival. Their quiet strength and gentle knowledge seeped into every meal, every tradition, shaping the flavors and stories we still savor today. So as you imagine the steady hands and soft voices filling these rooms, let the gentle presence of women in the kitchen soothe you. Let their enduring legacy carry you deeper into the warm, comforting heart of early American kitchens. You reach the quiet culmination of your journey, where the legacy of early colonial flavors gently unfolds into the present, a soft echo that continues to enrich our tables today. Imagine the comforting aroma of pumpkin pie wafting through a modern kitchen, the earthy taste of cornmeal bread breaking softly in your hands, or the gentle warmth of a spiced cider, all descendants of those humble beginnings. These flavors have traveled through time, transformed and cherished, linking you to centuries of slow, thoughtful cooking. The early colonial kitchen was not merely a place of